Any thoughts?
Well, it's kind of the forerunner. Pride is going to keep you from taking advice and can lead to destruction, lead to really bad outcomes. Same with stumbling. You aren't looking out. You think you've got it all figured out.
Yeah, you've got your eye on the horizon as opposed to the stumbling block that's at your feet, and it can lay us low. I've fallen for that one. Henry.
Yeah, I think what it's saying is that when we let pride control us and use us to the point to where we say things that we shouldn't say. We feel like we are better than anyone else, and we're doing things that is hurtful to the other person or the other people around us. But it causes and brings destruction. You're going to always have a problem if you have a prideful heart, and you see that haughty spirit shows up before a fall.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I'm going to take us on to the next one so that we can move towards the next section. Proverbs 29:23 is our last Proverbs section here before we move on to some of the other thoughts the gentleman pointed us towards. 29:23. Any takers for readers? Let's go with Maddie.
One's pride will bring him low, but he who is lowly in spirit will obtain honor.
Any thoughts on the application, or shall I?
Well, my thought just goes to when Jesus talked about, but the concept of if you sit at the high end of the table, they're going to ask you to move down when someone more important comes in.
Or could, yeah.
Right? And vice versa, if you sit low, then you'll be honored by asked to move up. So that seems to be a very
Direct connection. Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. I thought kind of down into the Beatitudes and Sermon on the Mount area of, the meek are going to inherit the earth. Can't remember whether there's a section on what the prideful and the haughty are going to inherit. I don't think he mentions it in there that I recall. But yeah, no, I think your thought is even better, of the illustration of claiming honors that are not your own are likely to lead to your embarrassment, and as to connect with what Henry had talked about earlier, also can cause pain to others. It's an interesting one. Any other thoughts on this particular verse?
I think you can be humble or you can be humiliated. And,
It's a nice way to put it, very alliterative.
Humiliation is always going to come to those who are prideful at some point in time.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I agree. It sometimes amazes me that some people have so much pride and obliviousness that they don't know that they've been humiliated until later on in their life when they finally realize what is gone. It's hard sometimes when we're not self-aware at all that our arrogance or our pride can embarrass us without us even knowing it. Leah.
For myself, my humility has grown as my age grows. As I get older, I realize I wasn't very smart when I was really proud about how smart I was. But as I get older, a lot more humility starts coming apart.
My experience matches that. So you and I are alike. John, you have a thought?
I was thinking about when Miriam and Aaron kind of start taking on airs.
Mm-hmm.
Moses doesn't say anything about it, but God got
That would be a humiliation for sure. No, good, fantastic example. I don't see any more hands or thoughts. Let's push on to the next section here on the pride of life. On 1 John 2:15 through 17, if memory serves, that's the one that speaks to the various prides, the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. But let's double check that just to make sure. Please.
Do not love the world nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world.
Okay, perfect. It's the passage that I recalled. So then what the gentleman that's writing our book has directed us to think about is explain what each of those three categories of sin involves. Lust of the flesh. Sam's opinion, I'll give you Sam's opinion, and we'll go from there to get other people to help me out with it. Lust of the flesh, I have always looked at that as the searching after material things, the comforts, the big houses, the cars, the material things. I think I read, and if I only had my book with me that had my notes, as I recall, Matthew Henry, one of the gentlemen that did a pretty large commentary, had a lot to say on this one and had a couple of very nice quips that were very spot on, that talked to the lust of the flesh as being something about material possessions, but I don't have those at hand right now. Other thoughts on lust of the flesh?
I had the cravings of the sinful man. Whatever a person can get their hands on in order to sin, that's the lust of the flesh.
Okay, so it's something that you can physically get. So yeah, as I recall, when I did this, I attributed that particular one to the touch as opposed to the eye or the ear or the tongue or something. So that's not bad at all.
I got that it was appealing to the senses, so things that would draw us off in a sexual sense or in a gluttony, those kinds of things that would just would satisfy the physical urges.
Tammy?
People seem to be, to my thoughts, the lust of the flesh are normal desires that have moved into the sinful realm. Sexual desire outside of marriage, gluttony, even beyond what is a healthy thing. All those sins that our bodies may need, not the sins the things that our bodies need or have been given to us, but not used properly.
No, that's an interesting one for to kind of paraphrase what Tammy had in case, because she sits forward, and was saying is that it connects in the idea of its things that we already do that aren't necessarily sinful. Yes, I hope we all like food. We all like, warm houses. We all like those various things. But it's possible and even a regular problem when we go too far in those things, when hunger and enjoyment of pizza turns into gluttony, when sexual gratification or something, or the love of a spouse or something goes into something that's all you can think of and it's outside the plan of the Lord, when material possessions for your own comfort, warmth, and safety goes from, gee, those are nice things to have, to these are the only things I need to focus on. Did I capture that kind of, dear? Okay, well.
That's
Henry will take another crack at it because he could hear Tammy and she did a great job.
No, he almost made me forget my thought. And she's right. Our flesh, when you think about it, really goes against what God wants us to do and to have. When we want too much of anything, if we desire something that doesn't belong to us, if we do things that because this is what the flesh wants.
Right.
And so we're not to give in to the flesh. We're to tell the flesh, no, I'm not going in that freezer and getting another
Ice cream
big
bar.
ice cream bar. I'm not going to do it. But the flesh keeps saying, go get it.
Go get.
Go get it.
You're sitting in my living. You're sitting in my living room, Henry,
But we have to.
and Roger's living room, by the way. I know from this morning.
But we have to control ourselves when it comes to that, because a lot of times we do things that what God doesn't want us to be doing, and we do it because the flesh wants it.
Yeah. Amen. I see no other eager participants. Let's move on to the lust of the eyes. Let's try for. So anybody want to take a crack at how we define what the lust of the eyes are? I'm sorry. I'm going to go to the lovely Cindy, and then.
I looked it up and I got sinful desire to possess what we see or to have those things with visual appeal.
Okay, Debbie.
Pretty much the same thing. It's just the same. It's just looking at things and going, I have to have that. It's similar to the flesh.
Similar to the flesh, yeah.
It's just there's just a fine minute difference, and that is that everything you look at, you don't have good enough, so you have to see what's out there that's better.
Yeah, when I was looking at it and trying to kind of get it set in my head, I went back to the physical senses and thought the lust of the flesh I attributed to touch and taste, where I took the lust of the eyes to sight. So yeah, something along those lines. Tammy.
I always kind of equate the lust of the eyes to covetousness.
Yeah.
Those things that I may desire, they may be something I can literally see or something I can imagine and to desire and want that isn't owed to me in any regards. So I look at that those are not owed, not mine, shouldn't ever be mine, but those are the things that I see, whether I see them with my sight or I see them with my mind, that I want.
Okay. Very good. Dan.
The lust of the eyes takes us beyond what we can grasp. And to see that, and lust, in this text, lust is evil. It's not just any desire.
Right.
It's an evil desire, like we talked about this morning. And so it's seeing things that we could do if we had the opportunity. But it's beyond, we don't have the opportunity, but we still want it. So we can see it, but we can't actually grasp it.
Okay. I'm chewing on that one right now. I'm going to have to masticate that one. Put it on the cud. Liz.
Jealousy can also be a big part of lust of the eyes, looking at what other people have and not being coveting what other people said about being coveting other things, but looking at other people and what's around us. And jealousy is a big part of that too.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That's good. Of tying jealousy feels like it's in the same realm that Dan and Tammy were talking about. No more bitters. Wait, Randy.
Kind of along that same line from Psalm 73, as for me, my feet had almost stumbled, my steps had nearly slipped, for I was envious of the boastful when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. That whole psalm talks about that.
Yeah, that gets
It's about seeing what others have and longing kind of for that.
longing, the jealousy aspect that Liz was talking about. No, that's a fair, and it's easy to get lost in that sort of thing. It ties into something that many people struggle with of, why do the wicked, get all that? But the good people are suffering. It's a very human emotion, which oftentimes when I'm getting that sort of emotion, it's important to kind of remind me, like, the Lord didn't say this was heaven. Here's a testing ground. Never promised me a rose garden. Is that how the song from the 60s or something went? Roger.
I think what a best example we have is David and Bathsheba. And all it took was looking across his fence into the other garden, seeing this lady. And if you finish that story, it ruined his life, even into his old age.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another good example. Okay, let's dive down into the pride of life, which I feel is the one that, we're theoretically focusing the hardest on for this particular one. It's one that I've always struggled myself with because I fear that I'm the most susceptible to it. And that's the one of pride, of, do you lack humility? Have you become arrogant? Are you not understanding what you look like when you're behaving? That pride of life, if I was going to try to define it as we've talked about the other ones, is the seeking out for recognition, power, applause from others, that sort of thing, which is kind of a dangerous thing because, there's many things. I remember, oh my word, it's been decades or more. I remember Chuck Lindbergh preaching on something out of one of the self-help books at one point of, what do women want? What do men want? And men wanted respect, was one of the common drives that men wanted. And to me, that can get out of control to tie up your own life of, are you looking for respect and do you deserve it? And that line can easily run the line of pride, arrogance, lack of humility, selfishness, etc., which are dangerous things, I believe, and ones that I worry about on a regular basis. But I'm running my mouth when I'd rather hear what you had to say. John.
One guy I can think of that was guilty of all three, right off the top, was Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. He had it all. Whatever he wanted to satisfy his lusts, he could have. Whatever he saw that he wanted to take, he took. He thought he was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Of course, they didn't have that back then. But
they had people for that.
yeah. But what happened, and you can see what God thought about a person like that, was right at that time when Nebuchadnezzar was on that balcony and he was looking out over his kingdom saying, look at all that I am, look at all that I've done, look at all my greatness. God said, you think you're the great one, huh? And then took him down a whole bunch of notches and made him pretty much like one of the beasts in the field until God was satisfied that he learned his lesson.
Yeah, fair point. Good point. Dan.
Well, most of us don't have the pride because we're so rich or wealthy. But everything he said was right. I think the pride of life is it's an arrogant attitude that says I can decide the way I want to live myself. I get to choose how I'm going to live.
Yeah.
And so I've done this, I've seen that, and now I'm going to decide what I want to do. And there's probably desires and stuff behind it. Eve, all three of these are in Eve. All three of these were manifested in Jesus as far as temptations were concerned. And but just on a regular basis, it just seems to me that arrogance, pride of life is, you can't tell me what to do, I get to decide for myself.
Yeah, which sadly sometimes feels like a very American concept. And it's interesting as I go to different places, that little bit of a culture of like, no, I go to Germany, and it's just like alles in Ordnung, everything is in a particular order. People submit much more so where, in America, it's like, you're not the boss of me. I'm going to do it the way I want to. Is that unique to the American culture? No, by no means. I attribute it a little bit more to, I use the words selfish as opposed to selfless sometimes when I'm thinking about it. But I think your point is well taken, Dan. Well taken.
Yes, and I think that, when you start talking about the pride of life, we have to understand that what God expects from us is that we should have that pride and show that pride in Him, giving Him the
Amen.
glory. Our lives should be focused on being prideful that we're in.
We should be
His
boasting
kingdom
in the Lord.
and boasting in the Lord,
Yeah.
giving Him the glory, not to be prideful for worldly things,
Yeah.
things that are of this world, because this world is going to be.
Consumed by fire, I
Yes.
think, is what's in the scripture. Yeah. No, good point, Henry. I appreciate it. Daniel.
I think the pride of life to me is the one that is the most challenging because in some ways we can learn to have mastery over our bodies, to not, see things and covet them, to not just fulfill every physical desire we have. But the pride of life is something that you can have all of that in control, and then you can begin to develop pride that you have everything in control, that you figured it all out, you understand it all, and
Yeah.
suddenly you're back to the beginning of having to deal with pride of life. And one of the examples in Scripture that I think teaches us really well is the story of Job, because he was a man who I think it sounds like he had mastered those first two things. He was very faithful, he had taught his children well, he was very successful in life, he was generous to the poor, just a really great example of someone who was managing his life well, but then when he was struck with affliction, he started realizing that he was humbled by God and by these other friends when he realized that he thought he had it all figured out. He thought he understood how God worked in the world, how he brought about justice, and he really didn't. And God had to say, who are you? Who are you to question me? Who are you to think that you know what's going on behind the scenes? And so it seems like a good reminder for us that when we think we've got things all figured out, maybe we're struggling with pride and not just trusting that God has a plan behind the scenes.
Yeah, I agree. Hadn't thought of that one.
Good illustration of that is to wear a button that says, "I finally mastered humility."
Yeah, it kind of fits into what Lee was saying at one point of, I started out kind of without much pride, and suddenly as a teenager and a young adult, I knew everything. Gosh, I was smart and all that. And then as I aged, I realized maybe I didn't as much, and kind of comes and goes, ebbs and flows. I think it ebbs and flows a little bit with where your life's at in the problems you're facing, the situations you're finding yourself in. I think there's something a little bit cyclical about it, and I'm not overlooking you, Tammy. Your thought was?
It's kind of along Dan's line of, that arrogance, and I think another saying that we have in the U.S., I know my rights, of always really wanting to get that maximum and not willing to give something up for somebody else's good, or standing on something that you owe me this because it's my right.
Yeah. Sometimes we confuse what's a right and what's a want. John.
Brought up a few weeks ago, you think of Naaman, and he's sitting there, he's been given the solution to getting rid of the leprosy that he has.
Mm-hmm.
But just because things didn't go quite as he expected, he hadn't been shown the honor that he thought he would be shown,
Yeah.
he's ready to give it all up.
Yeah. Blinded by our own self-importance or self-absorption. Sometimes I wonder if that's the issue. Maybe it's not selflessness or selfishness, but just self-centered, absorbed.
I think it's this book talks a lot about self-image. His self-image was a little bit off.
Yeah,
And that was his possession. He was guarding that self-image.
yeah, maybe you're helping give me a glimmer of how Mr. Billingsley thought, because I felt that he spent too much time on the self-image thing, but you may be right. I may come around to loving the man yet. Tammy?
Thinking of what John was saying, it was always interesting to me that the person who was able to bring Naaman to rethink this was someone who had no social status.
Yeah,
Was a slave who had been like, if he'd been offered to dip in the Jordan River to be gotten rid of an affliction, would have done it in a heartbeat.
right.
And so he could see the value in it and was able to convince his master, because his place in society was
Non-existent.
yeah,
Yeah.
so he didn't see this as dishonorable or anything. He saw this was wow, somebody's giving you a solution. Go for it.
Yeah, indeed. Maddie?
Well, I was given some good advice where it's, if you find yourself struggling with a certain sin, you've kind of identified, this seems to be a problem and it's confusing me and I don't know why this is such a problem for me. So then, in this case, let's say you've identified pride as a problem that you keep stumbling on and you don't fully understand why. Is this so hard for me? Well, it's like, when you're, the advice I was given is, when you're struggling with something, to get a little bit of a perspective shift, like we've been talking about, to sort of, to back up and look at it, first think, with every sin that you're committing, there's a lie involved from Satan. And there's obviously going to be an opposing truth from God, so identifying the lie. So in the case of pride, like let's say the person Daniel was talking about who has all this self-control and now you have pride because you have been able to control all these things that God said and good for you. Well, the lie that Satan's telling you is that you're in control, that you have achieved this, that you can identify the lie from Satan, and then you've got to turn around and find what the truth is from God, because as a Christian, I believe that truth comes from God, so okay, let's look for it. And the opposing truth, half of it is that, no, God's the one who's really in control, who really has command of all of that. The things I was feeling about myself, that's actually true about God and not me. I'm not those kinds of things. But reminding yourself, you still have worth because God gave it to you. But anyway,
Yeah.
a perspective shift advice I was given when you're struggling with certain sin and just can't understand it. What's the lie that's involved here from Satan, and what's the truth that God says about that?
No, that's good advice. Thank you. Let's drift on, shall we? I'm going to do a quick look at, I seem to remember that I had interesting notes on the sections on conclusions, but I don't have them with me, so I'm going to turn the page and we're going to go towards the discussion questions instead and see what we've got in there. Let's see, the first question on page 30 was, how does the example of the praying Pharisees show us that we must have the proper attitude during our worship to God? Anybody want to take a crack at that one? Daniel, and then Debbie.
One thing that's occurred to me is that the part of the issue was that the Pharisee was misinterpreting, in a sense, he was misinterpreting the humility of this person, and I think that can happen a lot in our own worship because different people express humility in different ways. I know there's been a church that our families worshiped at that someone felt the need anytime they prayed to kneel on the ground, and you could see someone looking at that and misinterpreting it or judging in some way, and this is a good reminder of the fact that others are worshiping in lots of different ways. If it's not disturbing you, allow them to do that and reflect on your own self rather than focusing on how other people are doing things.
Fair point. Debbie?
And I kind of, the same thing is like, if we're concerned about what other people are doing, then we can't reflect on ourselves and become humble to God for ourselves and our own actions instead of worrying about what other people are, comparing ourselves or making ourselves better than other people and feeling uncomfortable that way, same as Daniel.
Yeah. I kind of looked at it slightly different in that, because it feels like you're both using the comparison of the Pharisee versus the publican, and I felt a lot more about the publican and how I saw it as well. But the gentleman said, well, what did the Pharisee specifically do wrong? And when I thought about that in my head anyway, is that he had a whole lot of pride. It was like, this is kind of almost the textbook definition, if you will, of, well, I'm a perfect law keeper, therefore I don't need any grace. I don't, you're lucky to have me here, Lord. And I think that is what was being illustrated in that particular person's behavior. And then it's beautifully mirrored, as you say, into the other gentleman who is just like, I'm not articulate, I'm not even claiming that I'm a law keeper or anything. I am just repentant. I know how much in need I am. It's a different dichotomy, at least in my head. Yeah, Jonathan.
The Pharisee did not ask for forgiveness, and so he was not forgiven.
Pithy and perfect. Thank you. It wasn't asking for forgiveness, and thus was not forgiven, because we all fall short of the glory of God, and we all need that redemption. I'm going to get dinged for the 5-minute bell, so we're going to pop on a little bit further. How should Diotrephes be dealt with in the local church? I'm going to need help on this one because my answer was beautifully written down and it's at home and I don't remember what it was. Anybody got a help for me? If not, then I'll move on.
I said that we should call public attention to what he is doing and require him to repent.
Okay.
That's what John was going to do when he got there.
Right. Public reprimand, effectively. Mike.
Anytime we see somebody sinning, and this guy was sinning, we should go to him. And if he listened, we want our brother. But if he didn't listen, then that's when we would pick others and tell to the church. And so you need to be. But sometimes we each do things that we don't realize we're being in those situations. So we go to them first and explain that to them.
Yeah, it would be a subset of the speak the truth in love. Start out with love, but if that's not going to work, then maybe it's time for the 2x4.
Well, that's love too.
Well, it's sometimes you need to drive the point home with a larger hammer than.
I agree with what Mike said, but Diotrephes didn't sin against me personally.
Yeah.
This isn't that kind of a sin. If he sinned against me, yes, I go to him. He sinned against the whole church.
Yeah.
He's an arrogant taskmaster who wants everything his way, and it's not a matter of one-on-one. This is a public sin against everybody, and he needs to be called on.
Publicly. Yeah. No, I see your point. No, fair point.
1 John 5:16, if you see a brother or sister committing a sin that does not lead to death, you should pray and God will give them. And so the concept is, I think we can see somebody who's doing the sin, even though it wasn't necessarily against us, and still out of love go and say, hey, do you realize what you're doing here? And so I think both are true when that this was a public sin to be publicly corrected, but I think we each have this, we need to be looking out for each other, I guess is my point that I was just making.
Okay. Let's see. Read Matthew 4, 1 through 11. Which of these temptations appeal to the pride of life? That was the section on the temptations of Jesus, as I recall. I'm really missing my notes now. Help me out. Anybody want to take a crack at that one?
Well, to bow down to the king of pride, and he'd be given everything.
Yeah. And Jonathan, I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. I was going to go with that.
in that he called him on many different things, but for the one that's pride, it was the bow down and him being raised up and being made himself better, saying, okay.
You can almost see it in all of them, because
You,
the first one in verse 3, he said, if you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread. So just kind of challenging who he was, and so kind of appealing to that. And then I think I had verse 6 was throw yourself down. If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. So kind of testing his pride there. And
yeah.
Verses 8 and 9 was all the kingdoms.
Yeah, as I recall, when I was looking at this one, my first thought was, well, these are all applicable, but one is probably the answer that Mr. Billingsley was pointing at, and I think it was the one that Dan pointed out initially is the one that the author of the book, I think, would argue was the most appropriate. In Luke 12, 15 through 21, how is pride manifested in the life of the rich farmer? That's the one where the gentleman was having a really good season and such and decided, my word, maybe I need to build bigger barns, bigger silos, and I'm just going to rest on my laurels forever because I've got it made. And the Lord comes and says, yeah, but now is this very night is when you're going to be called into judgment and your material possessions aren't